Swayam.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much, Eddy. And thank you all for joining us today and participating in this webinar. And I'm just so grateful that we're able to share this space and time from Vancouver on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. So thank you so much. My name is Swayam, and I'm going to be one of your co-hosts for today. And I'll just introduce a little bit about myself. So I am a volunteer with the Citizen Advisory Committee, and I've been a part of this committee since 2019. Previous to this, I did work in community corrections, and currently I do wear a few other hats within the criminal justice system. I do work with the provincial government providing assistance to victims of crime. And I'm also working with the Vancouver Police Department, providing crisis response and intervention during police incidents. So that's just a little bit about me in a nutshell. I do have a few housekeeping items to go over before we move ahead. And before we move ahead with a few other introductions. So one of the first housekeeping items is just letting you know that this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending a link to the recording in about 1 week. As well, the video or the recording will be posted on YouTube. In case the webinar is cut off for whatever reason, please do give us a few moments to restart the webinar, and then you will all be able to rejoin us as well. And if you're having any audio or video problems, you may want to consider trying to use a different device. And hopefully that may resolve any issues you may be having. As Eddy mentioned earlier, you're all welcome to network and use the chat to get to know each other and introduce yourselves. We do ask that everyone remain respectful and mindful of the topic for today. And feel free to use the chat to pose any questions that you may have that may come up. I will be filtering through the chat and identifying any questions that will be that we can ask during the Q&A portion after our speakers present. We are also using the auto-generated closed captioning, and I believe if you do require the closed captioning, you'll have to turn that function on yourself. There's a toolbar just at the bottom of the display, so you'll be able to find the option there to turn on the closed captioning. And it may take a few moments to kick in, so just be a bit patient with it. Eddy also mentioned that the audience cameras and the audio is turned off, so we won't be able to see your lovely faces today. But again, just feel free to use the chat to connect with each other. So each speaker will have about 20 minutes to provide their presentation. And we just ask that we'll do the questions after all of the presenters have presented. And at the end of this webinar, we'll also make the slides and resources available, so you'll all have some information to access and further reading to enjoy. So I think that concludes my housekeeping, and I will now pass the floor to Dennis Herfst, who is the Area Director for Metro Vancouver West Community Corrections.
All right, thank you, Swayam. Good morning, everyone, or maybe more appropriately, I'll say good afternoon or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. So it's an honor to have so many people join us for this exciting topic. We're quite excited to put on this webinar again. So thank you to all our participants out there for joining. As Swayam mentioned, my name is Dennis Herfst. I'm the Area Director overseeing the Vancouver Parole District for the Correctional Service of Canada. So we are based in downtown Vancouver here in British Columbia, Canada. And so I just wanted to share briefly this morning in my welcoming comments a little bit about who we are in the Correctional Service of Canada. I know we have a lot of people from our corrections department here with us today, but also a number of you from outside the organization. Essentially, we here in Vancouver are responsible, like all our other community parole offices across the country, for the supervision of federal offenders that are released from our federal penitentiaries. And so public safety is our overarching priority, but our job is also to work very closely with our offender population to assist them in their reintegration efforts. And so we do that through the dedication and hard work of a lot of our frontline staff. We have frontline parole officers, program facilitators, mental health teams, Indigenous staff, and it's a real team effort along with our community partners, which includes our local halfway houses and our police departments. And so it's a real team effort in terms of the supervision of our offender profile. And part of that also involves our local citizen advisory committees, or what we call CACs. And these citizen advisory committees are, just as they sound, they're advisory committees from our local communities made up of volunteers. And so almost every parole office and penitentiary in the country will have a citizen advisory committee attached to them. And their goal is to essentially observe, liaise, and advise on our correctional operations and practices. So they're kind of our eyes and ears in the community and giving feedback on our policies and procedures and operations, and connecting with our offender population as well as our community partners. They can go into our local halfway houses and institutions and meet with staff and offenders there as well. And so Swayam is part of that local citizen advisory committee attached to our office here in Vancouver, as is Eddy Elmer, who's our vice chair, and he'll be speaking just momentarily. So I'm very fortunate and privileged to have such a dedicated local citizen advisory committee. They're the ones that really spearheaded today's event and this webinar. And so I did want to acknowledge at the outset here, in particular, our local citizen advisory committee, and in particular, Eddy and Swayam, for the tremendous amount of work they've done in the past weeks and months to bring this event together. It takes a lot of work behind the scenes to try and put on an event like this. So I certainly want to acknowledge and thank them for all their efforts. We have, I think it's close to 350 registered attendees. A number of those will be viewing the recording later, but we're thrilled with the turnout again. This is now our 4th annual webinar. This kicked off during COVID, kind of out of necessity. I don't want to bring up the C word here. I know not too many of us want to think about that at this point, but that's certainly where this initiated back in 2020. And so we've had previous webinars on aging offenders, on the topic of victims. And then last year it was on certain profiles of offenders, particularly lifers and sex offenders. And so this year, obviously, the topic is on digital literacy. And again, we've got a very exciting lineup of speakers for everyone here this morning. And I know our CAC was quite keen to try and put together this topic. They felt it's very timely. As we all know, the world continues to evolve with technology. And so sometimes we don't necessarily think about how that might affect or impact our offender population that we work with. So it's a very timely topic. But yeah, we have 350 people registered. And I'm just going to give a shout out to the countries that are represented, because this has really turned into not just a local event, but a national and international event each year, which we're thrilled about. So this year, again, we have attendees from across Canada, the US, the UK, France, Finland, Portugal, Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, and Fiji. And then for the first time as well, we have people from Central and South America, including Costa Rica, and a group from the Belize Central Prison. So this really has become an international event and an annual event that we look forward to each year in November. And we're very excited for that today. So in closing, I hope everybody enjoys the event. I'd encourage everyone to stay tuned for the full couple of hours, because there's great speakers from start to finish. And on that note, I also want to give a preemptive thank you and appreciation to all our guest speakers. People are joining us from different time zones around the world here, taking time out of their busy schedules and their own personal lives to join us here today. So on behalf of the Correctional Service of Canada, I also want to give a very special thanks to all our guest speakers today. And with that, I'll turn it over to our Vice Chair of our local Citizen Advisory Committee, Eddy Elmer.
Thank you, Dennis. As Dennis said, I'm the Vice Chair of our local CAC, and I've been in that role since 2019. And starting this March, or this May, I also became the regional chair for Pacific region, so for our CACs in Pacific region. In my spare time, I'm doing my PhD in sociology and social gerontology, and I focus on aging and mental health in marginalized groups, especially isolation and loneliness. And this is actually one of the reasons that I was thinking or suggesting a webinar on digital skills, because I know how important those are for everyday functioning, not just for finding work and for accessing services, but also for connecting with people. And those who are left behind in our increasingly digital world have a difficult time making connections and find themselves feeling isolated and more lonely. And this is especially true, obviously, for people in prison and coming out into the community, people who are already at risk for social disconnection. And we know that isolation and loneliness increases the risk for health problems and hastens the aging process and even increases the risk for early death. And not having social connections is a risk factor for reoffending. So that was having the digital skills I felt and talking about that I felt was really important for addressing this particular set of risk factors. And our CAC members themselves have also been keenly aware about the growing digital divide, particularly during the pandemic. And while many of our members are very tech savvy, not all of them are, which has affected their ability to participate in CACs. Speaking for myself, I think I'm somewhat intelligent, but even I struggle with a lot of the technology we have today. Things are changing at a rapid pace. There's new programs, there's new hardware, there's all sorts of technical issues with broadband. I found even setting up this webinar was more difficult this year than in previous years. And I know with a lot of my committee work, we've been experimenting with different programs and document sharing systems, and it can be quite overwhelming. And I found myself struggling, and I can imagine for people who are in prison and coming out after a long time who've never used the internet or a computer or a smartphone, they would be even more overwhelmed by all of this. And again, feeling quite isolated and feeling somewhat just ignored and perhaps even dismissed when people just assume that they can just learn technical skills and just Google everything. So today we have an exciting lineup of speakers who will discuss various aspects of digital literacy inside prisons and in the community. We'll be hearing from Dr. Bianca Reisdorf, who's an associate professor and researcher at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Pia Puolakka, manager of Finland's Smart Prison Project, and James Woodland, chief of education at Bath Institution in Ontario. And for the first time, we're being joined by two returned citizens who've had their own personal experiences with the criminal justice system. So we have Molly Kelly and Aron Roy, who are graduates of the Last Mile program in the US. They will provide a nice transition from our discussion about digital literacy in the prisons to digital literacy out in the community. Regrettably, one of our other speakers, Dr. Victoria Knight, had a family emergency and can't participate today, and she was slated to talk about ethical issues. So what I'll ask is for the attendees just to sort of think about ethical issues as they hear the presenters and to pose any questions, and the presenters are also welcome to try to address any ethical issues they can think about, because I think that is an important topic. So we will start with our first speaker, and I'll give just a little bit of a longer intro for her. So Dr. Bianca Reisdorf is an associate professor, as I said, in the Department of Communication Studies at UNC Charlotte. Her research focuses on marginalized populations affected by digital inequalities, including incarcerated individuals and those returning to the community. She uses both qualitative and quantitative methods to evaluate the impact of digital skills programs on post-release outcomes. I think it's safe to say that she is one of the leading researchers in this field. And whenever I read any paper on this topic, I always see that her name is cited quite a bit in the references. And she's graciously accepted to be with us today, even though she's on a parental leave right now. So we're very grateful for her time. So Bianca, we turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Eddy, for the very kind introduction. And yes, I am on parental leave, so I'm very sleep deprived. So please bear with me. If I, start not making sense, just let me know. I'm going to share my slides with you. Can you all see that okay? Yeah, Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me for this really important webinar. I'm excited to be here, and I've been researching digital inequalities in general for the last 15 years, and I've been focusing a lot on incarceration and post-incarceration for the last 8 years. So there's a plethora of research that I'll be building on, not just my own, but also from other scholars. I will be sharing with you some of the core findings from my research and why digital literacy is so important for currently and formerly incarcerated people. I will go over some of the most pressing issues related to digital literacy and access during and post-incarceration. And I will also cover some trends, both concerning and exciting ones in this area. And finally, I will share some conclusions based on the research that my colleagues and I have conducted over the last 8 years. In what we call the global north, societies are increasingly and heavily dependent on the use of digital technologies and the internet. The majority of services, including crucial government services, are only or mainly available online, so that a lack of access to devices and the internet, a lack of skills, and a lack of also usage opportunities presents a major disadvantage. And that's regardless of whether you've been justice involved or not. The internet can no longer be considered a luxury. It really has become a tool that is absolutely fundamental to functioning and fully participating in our society. It's much like other utilities, like electricity or clean running water. And as you may already know, digital inequalities are not randomly or equally distributed in our society. So those who are already better off disproportionately also have better and more access points. They have higher digital literacy. They use the internet more frequently and for a broader variety of uses. And they also benefit more from using the internet, for example, by saving time or money or by finding a better paying job or such. We call this the sequential and compound model of digital inequalities, which means that access, skills, use, and outcomes build on one another. And so if you have inequities in one area, they will translate into additional inequities in the other areas. It's really important to note that those who are most likely to be digitally excluded are the same demographics that are also most likely to be disproportionately justice impacted. That is, those with lower incomes or education. In the US, Black and Hispanic communities are both most likely to experience digital inequities and to be overrepresented among the incarcerated and justice impacted population. Due to digital deprivation during incarceration, returning citizens experience what we call supercharged digital exclusion when they come back out, which amplifies the digital exclusion that most formerly incarcerated people or currently incarcerated people already experienced prior to their time in prison. Because technology is developed at such a rapid speed, even comparatively short sentences, so a year or two, can have a really detrimental effect. Eddy already mentioned, that even, people on the outside are barely able to keep up with all the new developments. So just imagine not being able to keep up for a year or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20, it really has a huge effect. Prior research has shown that because of this lack of digital literacy, formerly incarcerated people experience more adverse events when they're online, such as becoming victims of scams or fraud or identity theft or things like that. Another study has also shown that the digitization of the criminal record and the ability to screenshot things has made the criminal record more sticky and that it can show up anywhere on the internet. So even if you have the skills to know how to get your record expunged, which is a whole other story, it is likely to still show up somewhere else. This means that moving forward can become more difficult unless returning citizens also know how to get the content removed from the internet. Next, I will briefly go over the digital rehabilitation model that I developed together with my colleague R.B. Reichard. Our model builds on the so-called corresponding fields model of digital inequalities that was developed by Ellen Halsper. We generally assume in this model that the rehabilitation and re-entry process can, at least to some extent, mitigate the negative effects of incarceration and facilitate the return to society. Incarceration, as we all know, has a negative effect on both your online and offline lives, or realms, as Herfst calls it. And so there are different realms in her model. That's the economic realm, so anything related to jobs, education and such, the social realm, your contacts to other people, the personal realm, and the cultural realm. I'll explain all of these a little more in a minute. In our revised model, we include two offline realms instead of just one. So we have the prison realm as well as the reentry realm. And overall, we argue in our model that the digital realm is underutilized both during and post-incarceration, but it could really have a positive impact on reentry outcomes. So this is what the model looks like, and I'm happy to answer additional questions at the end of this webinar, of course. But as you can see, we have two offline realms at the top here. We have prison and reentry. And so the prison realm is largely completely offline. In most prisons and in most countries, there is no internet access for incarcerated people. And if there is, it's extremely limited. And so what we're saying is that across these different fields that you see here, across the different realms that you see here, the economic, social, personal, cultural, and health realm, there are things that need to be done during incarceration and post-incarceration. And there are things that could be done with the use of digital technology and the internet and make things a lot easier. So let's take economic as an example. So the prison realm would be basic education. You can take basic education classes in most prisons. There's low skill employment that you can do, but there is often not a lot more than that. Sometimes we see higher education offered, but that again also depends on the facility that you're incarcerated at. So what we're saying is that if we had access to online tools here and online education, we could offer a lot more than just the basic programming that we often have available in facilities right now. And then it keeps going on in re-entry, right? A lot of people returning to the communities take some additional classes. And again, having a smooth transition from incarceration, where we could already use these online tools, then to the re-entry, would connect us back to the actual society out there that is digital by default, right? And so we're seeing this across all the different realms. And really what I want to do in the future is actually revise this model and make it a lot more integrated, because I think the differentiation between those different realms is quite artificial. And we are at a point in society where we can't separate these realms anymore. They have to be considered all together. And so these kinds of dynamics we can see across all those different fields, all the different realms. And what we're saying is, if we as a society or societies across the world decided to move forward and really think about the access that we're giving, we could make a lot of positive use out of those. So let's move on to the research findings and the data. My own research and the data that I will share next are based on 3 different studies that I conducted together with colleagues in 2015, in 2018, and in 2020. I will not go into a lot more details than here on the slide, but overall, we were able to have conversations and collect data from both men and women who were either formerly or currently incarcerated at the time of our research. And the most recent study, which unfortunately got interrupted by COVID, that was a really exciting study. So I'm very upset that, we had to conclude this study early, but it included an intervention from a local nonprofit that provided digital literacy classes in a jail. And the participants also received a refurbished laptop together with the belongings on the day of their release. And unfortunately, we were not able to collect all the data that we wanted, but we still had some really good results from this study. So the core findings from these 3 studies show 3 different types of barriers that currently and formerly incarcerated people have to deal with the most. The first one is a barrier to access of the internet and devices, both during and post-incarceration. The second one is barriers in terms of lack of skills and skills training, also both during and after incarceration. And the third one is barriers with regard to support in terms of access and skills post-incarceration. All 3 areas had a really big impact on what people felt able to do. For example, having your own device that you could mess with without having to worry about breaking it for someone else made a huge difference for our participants in the third study. They felt free to try and fail at things rather than not attempting them in the first place because they were so worried that they were going to cause trouble for someone else. Similarly, when we think about the skills, even the short training that our participants received in the third study increased their overall confidence. And that was a really interesting result that we didn't expect. And it allowed them to explore things that they had not learned in the class itself once they came home. And for participants in all of our studies, having people around them that could support them with access and skills also made a very big difference. When we look at different groups of people, we see some key differences here as well. Our younger participants were able to readjust to the digital world a lot more easily than our older participants. And this also went hand in hand with sentence length. So those who were incarcerated for longer, of course, missed out on a lot more of the technology and had the most issues trying to adjust to a society that they really couldn't recognize. In terms of genders, we did not find any considerable differences in access or skills, but women tended to talk more about the support they had available through family or friends, and especially through their children and also their grandchildren. So there seems to be a bit of a gender difference here. Interestingly, race did not seem to make a difference in terms of the experienced barriers. And that is actually different from general digital inequalities in the general population. So that was a bit of a surprise to us. However, the resources that people had available, that made a really big difference. So for example, whether they had employment, whether they had a steady income, educational qualifications, etc. So those issues came into play here. Let's talk about the most pressing issues that we found here. So the issues were mostly related to really getting reintegrated back into society and the most basic needs that needed to be covered. And so those included finding work and being able to apply for work, writing and uploading or attaching resumes, how to write an email, how to fill in a job application. So things that a lot of people consider just, an easy task were not considered easy. Finding permanent housing is a pressing need. And again, that can be very helpful if you can do it online and you know how and where to do it. Finding health information, for example, around finding providers, treatment options, insurance, and here in the United States, also Medicaid. And finding other useful information. So things like navigating the city or the public transit system. Again, things that we don't often think about and many people take for granted were issues that people were really struggling with. And learning things from apps. So, YouTube was incredibly popular with our participants. And I think we would see the same thing with Snapchat or Instagram. So many people described YouTube as their one stop to learn things and to figure out how to use things. You can learn anything. It was really a treasure trove for people. So if you can figure out how to use YouTube or how to use Instagram or how to use TikTok, there are a lot of things that you can learn from these platforms in terms of DIY and things like that. And finally, a lot of our participants wanted to learn how to be better at reconnecting or connecting with family and friends and how to act on social media and also protect their own privacy while they are on social media. Some additional barriers that we see that were not necessarily mentioned by our own participants are attitudes from prison staff and the public, of course. So in the research that I did with Yvonne Jukes, for example, we had a lot of informal conversations with prison staff, both on the ground and in the administration. And there were issues and some attitude issues as well, but there were also issues in terms of interpreting things. So for example, we had one case where the administration had offered video visitations, and it was meant to be in addition to in-person visitations. But the staff on the ground misinterpreted that as you can either do the video visitations or the in-person visitations. So our participants, the incarcerated participants, opted to not do the video chats because they thought they were having their in-person visits taken away. And so once we were able to bring that up with the administration, they cleared that up. But those kinds of small issues can really stifle innovation in prison settings, of course, as well. And then we also saw a little bit of cases of using technology deprivation as a measure of control or as a punishment. So it's, still considered a luxury to have any access to tablets or things like that. And then the second part is the lesser eligibility perception of incarcerated people by the public. And we actually heard that from some incarcerated folks themselves too, that they said, we shouldn't have these things, it's a luxury, and that should be denied as a punishment, essentially. And if Vic was here, she would talk a lot more about this, of course, but we have a real opportunity to educate the public on the value of enhancing digital access and digital literacy in correctional facilities for successful reentry as well. So a few of the trends I want to talk about, some are concerning. I'm going to talk about those first, and then I'm going to talk about the exciting ones. Some of the concerning trends that I'm seeing is here in the United States, at least, I'm worried that people think prison tablets can address digital inequalities for currently and formerly incarcerated people. And let me be very blunt. Prison tablets are not going to fix the issues, as the functionalities are very, very limited and very different from what we can do here on the outside. In addition, some prisons charge a lot of money for things like educational content, entertainment, and connecting with family and friends. And that is a big problem. Another trend that worries me is the provision of half-hearted digital skills training, I call it. This was mentioned by almost all of our participants across our 3 studies. So if anyone got any training at all, it was often on old and outdated computers, or in some cases, some of our participants were just literally handed a book and were, supposed to read about computers rather than actually using a computer at all, which is ridiculous. I think you'll all agree. And then the final trend that is concerning is a focus on only offering digital skills training post-incarceration and thinking that that will fix the issue. And this is, of course, absolutely better than nothing at all, than no training at all, but it is almost too late at that point. Returning citizens have so many issues that they have to worry about once they get out, that fitting in the training into the busy schedules and dealing with transportation, etc., is presenting a real challenge. And we heard that over and over again from our participants who were like, I've got to find work, I've got to see my parole officer, and how am I going to fit in another class on top of that? And then I have to go to the center, which is on the other side of town, and I have to get there, and so forth. So we really have to start during incarceration. Starting post-incarceration is not going to be enough at this point. But there are also some exciting trends that I'm seeing. So I have, for example, seen an increasing interest in the provision of digital skills training from nonprofits, libraries, and other practitioners, both post and pre-release. And this is very promising, although the landscape appears to be a little bit of a patchwork right now, with various degrees of training length and training depth. It is a great start, and I think this is something we can build on. There's also increasing interest from the research community, and this might not seem important on the surface, but we do need good data on what is actually happening so that we can provide the data, that we can provide the evidence that we need to implement the best kinds of services and the best kinds of classes. And this is definitely true for digital literacy and digital access. And the final promising trend that I'm seeing is that more and more practitioners are including currently or formerly incarcerated people in both the design phases and the running of digital skills training. And this is so important. I cannot overstate how important this is. We're building on the expertise here of those we are trying to serve, and their expertise is exactly what we need. It allows to really tailor the training to the most pressing needs of our returning citizens. So it's absolutely crucial to include formerly and currently incarcerated people in these programs, in building these programs, in running these programs, etc. My final note is really that we want to move from rehabilitation to desistance. So digital access and skills can aid in the transition from just rehabilitation to desistance as a long-term goal. And we can really move from surviving to thriving. Digital entrepreneurship, for example, is something that a lot of US nonprofits are now focusing on, which is something exciting to see. It goes beyond just your basic skills, and it provides an additional avenue for building your life post-incarceration. And what I really want to also say to close out is technology is not a fix-all. We love throwing technology at a problem and think this is going to fix everything. But technology cannot fix everything. It's a great and unavoidable tool, but the overall goal has to be to address the social inequities that contribute to criminal offending in the first place. Thank you so much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Bianca. I don't know about others, I found that very, very thorough and very well organized. So thank you so much. And I am glad that you raised the issue of public attitudes. I know Victoria had planned to speak about that. I will raise that issue during the Q&A because I think it's important. Public attitudes of the public can support or hinder the availability of these programs inside our prisons. And I think this is where our citizen advisory committees have an important role in terms of educating the public about the value of providing technology and spending money on these kinds of programs. And I will also say personally, like the people in your studies, I adore YouTube and find it a tremendous educational resource and spend way too much time on it. So on that note, I will turn it to Swayam to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Eddy, and thank you again, Bianca, for your very insightful presentation. So our next speaker is Puolakka. Pia has been with the Finnish Prison and Probation Service since 2012. From 2018 to 2022, she was a manager of the Smart Prison Project, which introduced in-cell digital devices to an open prison for women. She continues this work as a senior specialist and team head, expanding the project to Finland's closed prisons. She also leads Rise AI, developing artificial intelligence applications for use in corrections. A forensic psychologist by training, Ms. Puolakka is part of the Europre ICT expert group and the Council for Penological Cooperation. Like Bianca, Pia is also one of the leading subject matter experts in this field, and we're so grateful to have her join us today, especially since it's getting close to 9 p.m. in Finland. So Pia, feel free to take it away from here.
Thank you for the introduction, and good evening and good morning to everyone. Can you hear my voice well?
Yes, we can.
Okay, and for the convenience of showing the slides properly, I think I will close my camera and let's see how it works. So just one moment. And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm Puolakka and I work for the Finnish Prison and Probation Service, and my presentation is about the digital literacy in Finnish prisons. The purpose of Prison and Probation Service is to reduce recidivism and support reintegration into the society. And in the Scandinavian prison model, the so-called normality principle is very important. So we try to provide prisoners as much as possible the same equal access to public services like all citizens. Our prison concept states prison as a learning environment for a life without crime. And now that we are in the smart prison concept mode, our prison concept and services are also enabled and supported by digital resources. And this is exactly to fulfill the normality principle, access to public services, more services for rehabilitation and education so that we are not restricted to the services provided in prison only, to provide training in digital skills, and also to secure basic and human rights from inside prison. Here is a visual picture of our prison concept. The idea here is that prisoners can use the outside prison services already during their incarceration, and in this way reintegrate back to the society already during their incarceration, and use the outside services, our important partners. And Finland has a very long tradition of using NGOs as partners for prisoners' rehabilitation. The Smart Prison project started in 2018, and we were able to implement Finland's first smart prison in the new women's prison during COVID in 2021. This is a closed prison unit for women only, for 100 women, and all women have a personal cell device in their cell with a special software for inside prison management of daily affairs, and also a limited access to outside and internet services and other web-based services. And this year and already last year, we extended the system to 2 other prisons, which are men's prisons. And you can see that the premises there are not so modern since they are older prisons. But at the moment, we have 236 prisoners and above 300 staff members as users for the system in our 3 prisons. And also our healthcare services for prisoners are using the system, and the so-called assessment unit and criminological library, so that prisoners can access the library services too. The system inside the device, which is a laptop in every cell with a steady internet connection, the system inside the software is called Doris. We wanted to give it a woman's name. So via Doris, you can digitally submit requests and other forms. You can contact also staff by chat messaging. There's a digital notice board, calendar. You can use video calls to staff and also to close ones and your children to outside prison. We can arrange group video meetings. Prisoners can use email to some extent. All important material is in the digital material bank, instructions, important information to read during incarceration. There's a restricted internet connection and also open office tools, so you can write your own papers and documents, homework with the device. And as you can see, Doris provides a lot of web-based services. And the idea is that all these services, using these services, train digital skills too. So education is probably one of the most important online services. There's basic education, high school education, and audio libraries. We also have basic courses on AI. NGOs arrange a lot of courses. There's a portal for social and civic services to use by electronic identification card. Online consultation to different officials, legal advice, family support, also some psychological, therapeutic support, and healthcare. And we've actually categorized our digital services into a map. So there's, as you can see, there's 7 rehabilitative themes, and we try to provide some services on all these important themes that are necessary for rehabilitation. If you're wondering what is the so-called digital guidance, our purpose is that all staff gives digital guidance to prisoners, at least in the smart prisons, so that they also can teach prisoners how to use these services. And that's actually a very important part of learning digital skills. So how does smart prison support digital literacy? Using Doris in itself trains basic digital skills needed for management of everyday affairs in prison and outside. And I would say the use of Doris simulates outside prison digital daily digital life or daily life practices. Asking for appointment time, advice, emailing, video calls, looking for information in internet, taking care of your so-called paperwork, documents from lawyers, from teacher in prison, and using strong electronic identification with certain services. I mentioned the important role of NGOs. They provide a lot of basic skills training, and also they teach the strong electronic identification processes, and also life skills and other important topics in general, but on a digital platform. So while you are taking your rehabilitative courses, at the same time you're learning also digital skills. And then also we train our prisoners in AI literacy. So Helsinki University provides us 3 free courses on basics of AI. And then we also provide some vocational skills, which is training AI as prison work. I'm going to tell you more closely about it later. Here, just to shortly introduce one of our most important NGO, Silta Rehabilitation. They are providing so-called digital desistance, as they call it, so supporting desistance from crime with digital learning platform and digital skills. And also they are specialized in so-called gender-specific rehabilitation and skills, digital skills, since the program was first introduced in the women's prison. Then from the Helsinki University, we are provided with AI literacy courses, 3 online courses called Elements of AI, Building AI, Ethics of AI. And the topics, if I remember correct, there are 6 modules with the topics like defining AI, problem solving, machine learning, probabilities, neural networks, even some basics of coding, and the future and ethics of AI. And this course trains literacy skills, digital skills, and cognitive skills in general. And I think it's best for those prisoners who can complete high school level studies. And this course can also be combined with the training AI work. And here is a screenshot of the course modules. As you can see, I've also completed it myself before I introduce it to prisoners, and I recommend it. And then this training AI work sounds a bit exotic, but is actually quite, would I say, basics. So training AI algorithms as prison work, and we do it in 4 prisons, including the women's prison. And it's in collaboration with a software company. This company provides prisoners training on the material and also training on the basics of AI, what AI is, and how this work supports building AI algorithm. Their training material includes text material on construction markets and projects. So also these kind of subjects can be learned through it. And prisoners learn digital literacy and concentration skills. It's also an alternative work form for those prisoners who are unable to participate in more physical or group work. And this can also be a kind of a starting point in prison work, that you first start with this kind of work and then you can proceed into more challenging prison work. Helsinki University got interested in this project, so they are currently studying the training AI work in Finnish prisons and its impacts. There's a lot of related benefits in digital literacy, which I've listed here. Learning something new and being good at it is important for your self-esteem, self-efficacy, and empowerment. And for many prisoners, they have a lot of failure experiences, they have low self-esteem, and they definitely need support psychologically in these things. It's a possibility to socialize and contact to outside. They have something meaningful to do during solitary time in the cell. They can stay informed about news and current events because they can use internet and certain news board sites. Securing basic and human rights like education, judicial help via online contacts, and being able to use more services from outside prison. There's also benefits for staff. I think faster, more flexible workflows. Also, staff sometimes needs to learn more digital literacy skills. And even more time for face-to-face communication if prisoners are more independent in the so-called routine tasks. And they also have possibility now to work from home if there are conditions that don't let them to come to work physically. And of course, you can see some cost effectiveness and maybe environmentally friendly benefits in digital prison design. Of course, there's also challenges. Finland is a small country, but especially in the southern part of Finland, we have more and more foreign prisoners. We have elderly prisoners, and I think this is funny that 30 plus is not an elderly prisoner, definitely. But we've noticed that this is already the line between the so-called digi-natives and non-digi-natives, at least among the Finnish prison population. Those that are 30 plus, they were born in the beginning of the 90s or in the late 80s, so they weren't yet born into a digital society. And this line can be seen in the prisoners' skills, I think. We have to be aware of the misuse and abuse of digital devices. Prisoners' skills, digital skills vary a lot. So we have very poor skilled prisoners, but also very talented prisoners. So risk of cybercrime, digital violence and harassment, we have to be careful with these. Attitudes, I mentioned about the prisoners' poor self-esteem. There's a lot of failures identity and lack of initiative. And sometimes I think that online learning and rehabilitation requires more independence. And this might be sometimes difficult for some prisoners, that they still need a lot of face-to-face help when starting these kind of studies. Of course, they can then continue for the more independent mode, but at least in the beginning, they need a lot of support and reassurance that this is not too difficult for you, you can do it, etc. And then staff digital skills and attitudes can sometimes also be a question we must address. Ethical questions, of course. We are working with a very vulnerable group, so data protection, data security questions are important. We need to remember the importance of face-to-face human contacts. And also the ethics of AI is a topic very wide, and I will not go into detail here, but I'm sure AI will revolutionize corrections in the very, very near future. So we need to be wary of that too. Last year, I was able to publish an article about our Smart Prison project in the Advancing Corrections Journal by International Corrections and Prisons Association. And here you see that we got pretty good result, even though we had been running the system for 1.5 years at this point. But the system is easy to use. Most are using it daily, and the system functions in a way it's supposed to function, and prisoners got enough help to use it. And most used services, as you can see, very many services were mentioned among the prisoners' answers, so the system is used a lot, which is good. And they value the contact to staff and healthcare unit, to relatives, use of internet in itself, and that there's material to read and study. Connection problems, issue in the civil life sometimes too, especially if it happens during a video call or webinar like this. They were wishing for more possibilities for studying and streamed material, so a bit of entertainment is also what can be provided, I think. Very similar kind of result from staff when we ask about the same questions. Staff also respects fast and real-time communication. Video calls are easier now to supervise, and prisoners are having more video calls now. It's easy to manage everyday affairs of wards and prison schedules. All important material is more reachable, and it's easier to work, especially with the NGOs and the outside partners, and have interviews and calls from outside too. And the question of how does this digital way of working change the prison culture is, of course, what we have to follow. But so far, I think it has given more possibilities for contact between inmates and staff than when we didn't have this kind of possibilities. So I think it has increased the communicative level in prisons. This year, I also was able to publish an article in the Advancing Corrections with my partner from the NGO side. So we asked how well this system supports important human rights from inside prison. And as you can see, our result was very positive. And I think this is part of the benefits of learning digital skills, providing digital possibilities to inmates that they can actually participate in the normal life in the society and take care of their rights during incarceration, thanks to digital skills and devices. Why do we do this? I think you've already heard a lot of good reasons. I hope so. Digital literacy is the new literacy. Without those skills, there's no chance for studying or vocational pursuits in the modern society. There's no inclusion no transition to modern society without these skills. No equal rights without digital rights. And the next new literacy is AI literacy. It will renew some old work forms, but also bring new ones. And sufficient understanding of what digitalization and AI is about is a matter of legal protection and equality. The ability to understand the basis of measures and activities concerning yourself when the decisions and procedures are somehow empowered by AI, or AI is somehow involved in the process, and how to have influence on them. The future prisons, what I'm trying to push forward here in Finland is that smart prison concept should be extended to all closed prison units. We should be able to use AI in an ethical way in the future. Staff and prisoners should be digitally and AI literate. We should have more digital collaboration with outside parties for providing those equal services and make so-called invisible walls so that you can use the services from inside prison. Provide a prison environment that corresponds as much as possible to the life outside. Train prisoners for the life outside. Enable them to meaningfully participate in the society in the same way as all other citizens, and train the necessary skills during incarceration. To fulfill these, we need digital devices, services, and skills for prisoners. I've added some links and references if you want to follow what has been done in Finland. There's also a documentary about the new women's prison, how the life there is. Maybe you can access it also from abroad. I don't know, but the link is here for this Finnish broadcasting company responsible for the series. And quite a lot has been published about the Finnish model and also some research articles. And then, of course, there's already plenty of international research on prison digitalization in general. For example, Bianca's research and Victoria Knight, Stephen van der Stene, etc. So, thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Pia. I found that very eye-opening, and you're obviously on the cutting edge in Finland. Something that occurred to me, you were talking a little bit about the psychological benefits, the benefits of digital skills training that goes beyond just job-ready skills. And one thing I was thinking about is just how people in the prison those who are more technically adept have an opportunity to help others who may be not so adept, and that can promote cooperation and communication between people in the prison, and that definitely builds your self-esteem when you can help somebody else. You feel better about yourself and about your own abilities. So I love all of that. And the focus on AI is also wonderful, and that you're offering courses on this is excellent. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So Next, we're going to talk about what's going on in Canada. So we're going to turn to James Woodland, who is Chief of Education at Bath Institution in Ontario, which is one of our medium security prisons run by Correctional Service Canada. He has been instrumental in heading the Digital Education Project, which supports access to digital learning opportunities and digital skill development. The project started at Bath Institution 3 years ago and is now at every minimum and medium security institution in Ontario, plus several sites in the Atlantic, Prairie, and Pacific regions. Mr. Woodland also oversees upskilling, micro-credentials, and certification programs in partnership with CORCAN. And I hope he'll explain for our international audience what CORCAN is, and also partnerships with educational institutions and nonprofits. So we're very glad to have him here, and we turn the floor to James.
Okay, thank you. I even just that CORCAN thing, I wasn't planning on explaining that, but thank you for reminding me to. So those kind of gaps of assumed knowledge I'll probably have throughout this whole thing. So please sprinkle in the questions to show me these things. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. And I just want to say about our previous two presenters, that was great. And what you are showing the data, you're sort of confirming what I've always felt, but not had maybe the data to support. So thank you for that. So yes, Chief of Education at Bath Institution, it basically means principal, but that's half my job. The other half is sort of D2L administrator, course developer, staff trainer, working with community organizations. The poor title I have is sort of D2L guy, but we'll get to that. So this is what we're looking at today. I was initially told like 15 minutes. We might have 20 now. My problem is I can be very long-winded, so I've actually tried to cut this down as much as possible. But I'm going to try and jam the last 4 years of my life into the next sort of 10 to 15. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. But please ask questions, although I sort of had a question thing at the end, so we'll see if we can do that. Now, we're starting with this. I feel like I'm kind of bearing the lead, but from a national perspective, this was a big moment for us. So this was our Commissioner Ann Kelly's mandate letter to the country. And it was to work to enhance inmate access to technology, including providing internet access to facilitate their access to education. We want to improve their access to post-secondary education. And at the time, to some degree, Ontario was already doing this, but this gave us sort of more of a national stage. And so this was sort of a very important moment for our project. So what is this digital education project? So it's the internet. Now, I always tell offenders, like, don't get too excited, because I always tell them it's the least interesting part of the internet, because what it is, we have, and it looks similar actually to the Finland model there, but we just don't have quite as many websites, it's a whitelist process. So you have URLs that are approved for offender access, and if they have that, if it's on the list, they can access that website, and if it's not, they can't. And so we started with literally our own website, which is a learning management system, D2L Brightspace. They can't access anything else unless it's been approved, and right now that list is still fairly narrow. And you can't access our website from outside of an institution. So it's sort of locked on the inside and the outside. It's open to anyone who's sort of identified to need education upgrading. Now, we have been sort of discussing what that means, because historically it meant someone who needs their grade 12 education, but we've been through this expanding that sort of definition as well. So that's my watch talking to me. In 2022, we launched in Ontario. As they just said, we're at all minimums and mediums in Ontario, including the male and women's sector. We're in 2 institutions in the Atlantic, 1 in the Pacific, and we're actually not in the prairies yet, but we're about to be, and same with Quebec. So our goal now, sort of my short-term goal for this fiscal, is to get to every max in Ontario. And actually, it's not on here, but we're also at our SIU, which I don't have enough time to explain that to everybody what the SIU in Canada means, but yeah. But we're going to be expanding over the rest of this fiscal and future fiscals to every region in Canada. So Benefits for teaching staff. So I don't know what we've sort of said COVID a bunch of times in this, and I don't know what every country's experience of COVID was, but in Ontario, at least, it was a lot of online school for our students or our kids. And for some parents like myself, that's scary because that didn't always go well. But that's not exactly what this is. This is a blended learning environment. So they're on a learning management system, but they're in our schools with our teachers. Now, generally speaking, teachers like this. We get to customize our content. I can tell you, when this process started, I was in the classroom, and one of the really interesting pieces for us and myself especially was learning the barriers students have. So my example I always use is different windows. So I didn't know this. I didn't anticipate this, but having multiple windows open at one time and navigating multiple windows is a huge barrier to learners. I didn't know that, but part of this process as we were getting on our feet was learning and listening to our students and going, oh, that's a problem, because they end up with too many windows and then they try and X out a window, but then they close all of their windows and now they're frustrated about that. And so not only being able to update our curriculum and not just working from textbooks that are potentially quite old, but we're also able to customize how we deliver our material. And that's been helpful because some of these barriers we didn't know existed for our offenders. Oh, no, and catalog too. Sorry, I missed that one. So we've expanded our catalog of courses. So historically, if someone needed their grade 12 in Ontario, they'd need 4 or 5 courses, and some schools would only have 4 or 5 courses for them to choose from. And we're up to 23 now, because once it's sort of in the system, we're able to scale our material a lot better. Benefits for offenders. So like, they're engaged. It's shocking. It doesn't mean they jump in with 2 feet. Sometimes they're reluctant, but they are engaged. They are seeing material that they seem to think, and I agree, is a bit more valid. It's a bit more updated because they're watching videos about things. They're not just reading a textbook. I think that was referenced earlier, is sometimes that's been our training of skills is, well, read a textbook and get back to us. We're able to offer a lot more content, again, so very quickly to people outside of Canada. We do sort of ABE, which is adult basic education, from basically grades 1 to 12. But now we've been able, through this, to expand other things as well. Now, what do we have? So there's a term that's becoming a little trendy, but I see a lot of value in it. It's micro-credentials. And so these are competency-based, short modules. They generally result in a certificate. The ones we're focusing on are very workplace or life skills. This is sort of open a window to certifications, as far as sometimes that's part of a credit. So they'll be getting a high school credit as well as a real world certification. And sometimes it's just on its own. And then credits, we're doing high school credits. We have now branched into the world of college credits. We're even working with some universities to try and offer university credits online. And then we have some vocational courses, which I'm going to get to in a sec. Seeing a lot of things in the chat, but at this point, I'm just going to wait until the end. Okay, so when we're looking at the gambit of what we're talking about here, which is upgrading their tech skills, we work with all levels. One of our beginning courses is called Computer Basic Skills. It's kind of correctly named. It's Computer Basic Skills. It starts with what's a button versus a menu? How do I save a document? Its large culminating task is filling out an online form and logging into an online system. So when we first got that, I'll be honest, I wasn't sure how useful it would be, and I was wrong. The amount of offenders who take that and are blown away by how much they learn shows the need. And it's come to the point where, in Ontario at least, all of our newcomers are offered that course upon time of incarceration at our assessment unit. So because we recognize that should be, really that even shouldn't be the baseline, but that's our baseline we're trying to create for ourselves. When we go up from there, we have a mouse tutorial. So again, we're talking about lower level stuff here. what's left click versus right click. Even working on mouse dexterity is something that if you haven't been on a computer, you don't have. And so they try and click on something and their mouse sort of flies around. And so it's something that it's useful for them to practice. Keyboarding, same thing. When we get into word processing, we actually get into sort of dual credit of high school course as well as certifications. So we do IC3 certifications in computing fundamentals. And then going from there, we're also putting them on a learning management system. So I've had to create a whole bunch of videos. I've had to hear my voice way too much but I've created these videos on how to get into a learning management system. How do I check my course? How do I look at my grades? How do I upload an assignment? How do I get my feedback? And so these videos are available to everybody, and some use them, some don't. But in the end, whether it's through working with the teacher, working with the videos, or sometimes working with their peers, they are picking up these skills. And I don't think we're that long from that being a required skill in your workplace too, because I don't know about everyone else, but I have mandatory training I have to do online or my boss gets mad at me. And I think that's going to permeate through our society as well. So even just the digital skills of navigating a learning management system are important. Once we get above that, we actually are doing Microsoft Office Specialist, again, that is tied to a high school credit for us, but it gets them a real life certification. And then we started using the Autodesk. So the AutoCAD, Revit, Inventor, again, so they're getting high school credits, but they're getting real life certifications as well that will lead to employment for them. Someone had mentioned I've been monitoring the chat while everyone else talked and sort of adding some things that might address questions, but from a accessibility standpoint, we even have a software that does speech to text and text to speech as well, which again, between that and the videos really help a lot of our learners. So micro-credentials. So I'm going to start with Good Learning Anywhere. I can't say enough good things about them. I think Linda and Robin are even here. They're great. In August of 2022, I started working with them as this idea of, well, we're on the internet. If I can get some outside content into our platform and offer it to offenders, that's probably a good thing. And so I don't have time to get into the details of how we did it, but they worked with us to get to the point where we're offering 42 of their micro-credentials to offenders. Between them, St. Lawrence College, and some other organizations, we've done just under 9,000 micro-credentials since August of 2022. And that has only grown exponentially. I think our first month was like 100, and now I don't even know at this point. So it's shown the need for sure. When we were talking about skills that we need to work on, just to grab some of the catalog that we grabbed from them, they have a course called Rentwise, which we're talking about finding housing and what's the rules and how do we go about that. Well, they have a course about that, and it's one of our most popular courses. There's a tips and tools for online job applications. Again, that's something that if you've been incarcerated for any period of time, that's going to be hard to navigate. And then they have a lot of real world skills, soft skills, and those are both the topics as well as the name of the courses. And I actually don't think I explained their organization well, so I should go back to that. So they're an Indigenous nonprofit funded by Employment Ontario. And so all of these courses have, at the very least, an Indigenous mindset, Indigenous content and representation, but they are open to all learners. And I can't explain, or I can't even emphasize enough the interest from offenders to this stuff. When we're into post-secondary opportunities, we just offered 2 online courses from Loyalist College to offenders. We just had 75 offenders take a course and 71 finished. And now I looked at that as okay. Apparently that blows their first year success rate out of the water. So I was kind of mad 4 weren't successful. They thought that percentage would just completely change their model. St. Lawrence College is going to do a similar thing. They want to run a business fundamentals certificate program. And then it's not in here because I'm literally talking to them right now, but Athabasca University is interested in doing the same thing. And so these are the things that we're working on as sort of a proof of concept now that we've established this this idea that we can offer other people's material in our system. So I have some testimonials here. And so I'm going to let you read those. I'm not just going to read them to you, but I'm also going to kind of give a couple quick anecdotes. So the one was when this project started, I was in the classroom. And so you'd often have an offender who goes, I don't know how to do that. And so, you know, you work with them, you kind of talking about, well, that's part of what you're going to learn now too. That's okay. And so I had a particular guy who did not want to use it, but I said, well, use that and write out your answers for me. And that's how we started. So we didn't want to type, and then finally started typing, and then he started getting in the system. Well, fast forward a couple months later, I was training my replacement. So I'm training a teacher now on how to use the platform. And I pop out of the classroom for a second, I come back, and he's showing her how to access his grades and what it looks like for him. And I just had to point it out to them going, whoa, 2 months ago, you told me you don't do computers and now you're training the teacher. And I just thought that was a moment that worth highlighting. And then the last one I'll point out is, so one of the Loyalist College courses we did was called Personal Finance. And back to like the skills offenders might be lacking when they get out. We had an offender who's been in for at least 20 years, but he's on ETAs, he's eyeing release, and he took this course and it taught him about online banking. And he took a lot of time to explain to me that he didn't know what that was. And he was very happy to learn what that was. And he realized the importance of what that means to him upon release. But that would have been a gap that he actually wouldn't have otherwise been taught. So these are the things that we are starting to explore. What are these skills that they are missing that getting their grade 12 specifically isn't getting necessarily given? So our next step is that we have become a offender digital education initiative. That's new, which is why it gives me I stumble across the wording here. But the premise is expansion, it becomes scalable now. And so when we build something in Ontario or the Atlantic or the Prairies, because throughout every institution in the country, we're doing some really cool things. And so every time we expand to a different place, part of my job is to get it in our platform, because then it's more scalable. So it's not just a really cool thing happening at Bowdoin because they have a cool staff member doing that. It then can be something that we can offer everywhere. Right. And so I think that was mentioned in other presentations here, which is, well, sometimes we do good things, and I say we in the Royal Correctional we, but it's not being consistently done. And my hope is that this becomes sort of a great equalizer where everything that we start offering will be available everywhere that we expand to. Okay, that's mine. Now, I'm going to ask my moderators here. Should I do questions now, or should I just wait?
Let's just wait till we finish the rest of the presentations, because I think there'll be overlap in the questions, and then we could all jump in. Thank you. This is very comprehensive. I've learned some new things I didn't know about what's going on at CSC.
And I still didn't say anything about Corcan, but...
yes. Well, you're welcome to right now if you wish.
Okay, just so... For those outside of Canada, and if there's anyone from Corcan here, I'll probably explain this poorly and I apologize. But we have an organization called Corcan within corrections that their mandate is to train employability skills to offenders. And so I would say in Ontario, but really it's not just us, but we've made the connection of, well, education and employment and employability for adults are intertwined. Right. And so we've been working with them sometimes in way too many ways for me to explain now, but basically they're another department in all of our prisons where their primary job is to train employability skills. So
excellent. And I'm hoping during the Q&A that we can come back to the topic which was mentioned briefly, just about older people in prison and going back out in the community. And sometimes I feel that they may be forgotten because we're putting a lot of energy and focused on employment skills, and we feel that's just for younger people. But older people can also benefit from not just from the non-employment skills, but even the employability skills, because just it's cognitively stimulating. It keeps you occupied, gives you an opportunity to connect with people. And sometimes I wonder if there's a bit of implicit ageism going on where we kind of don't pay attention to the older people, or they don't advocate for themselves and say, you know, we want to do this too, and how come you're forgetting us? So perhaps we'll return to that in the end. And I noticed in the chat window, I believe somebody was asking about the role of volunteers. And I know here in our region in Vancouver, a lot of our volunteers do this kind of work with people. And perhaps we could have a bit of a discussion about whether we see that nationally and what their role is. So now you'll turn it back to Swayam, who will introduce our final two speakers.
Great. Yeah, thank you, James, so much for your presentation. And I just wanted to quickly express my appreciation to our CSE colleagues who are answering some questions and clarifying terminology in the chat. That's great. Thank you so much. So our final two guest speakers are Molly Kelly and Aron Roy. Molly Kelly is a partnerships manager at The Last Mile. After launching in San Quentin State Prison in 2010, The Last Mile now partners with correctional institutions and employers across the US to train software engineers, developers, and other workforce-ready professionals. A graduate of the Last Mile program at Indiana Women's Prison, Molly's journey has propelled her to foster collaborations that drive positive change. With her unique blend of skills and empathy, she creates opportunities for justice-impacted individuals seeking transformation and empowerment. And Aron Roy is an IT apprentice at Checker, a human resources technology company. A native of San Francisco Bay Area, Aron is a testament to resilience and growth. His decade behind bars became a catalyst for discovery, where he learned to master coding through the Last Mile program at San Quentin. Aron was a staff writer for the San Quentin News and a peer mentor for the California Department of Corrections. In addition to his IT work, Aron is a tireless advocate for justice reform. So Molly and Aron, thank you so much for joining us, and feel free to get started.
Thank you so much for having us. So I'm going to share my screen. Make sure this works right. Can y'all see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Great. So the Last Mile is leading the tech re-entry. One thing that the Last Mile definitely does is we have wraparound services for people coming out of incarceration. So once someone comes home from our program, doesn't matter if they spent a day in our program or if they've been in our program to completion, what we do is we hook them up with a returned citizen advocate who walks on this journey with them to help them with digital literacy skills, resume building, cover letters, if they need housing, if they need to get clothes, whatever it is. We want to make sure that we build a community around them to help them succeed, because the reality is that 95% of people that go to prison are going to come home at some point. So what we want to do is make sure that we are supporting them on that journey and helping them learn and teach the skills that they need. So our mission and our values is we provide opportunities for personal and professional growth for justice impacted individuals through education and technology training. The Last Mile started in 2010 as a entrepreneur program, and our founders, Chris Redlitz and Beverly Parenti, started looking to see like what the market looked like and what kind of positions were going to be open. And in 2014, we became a coding program. We teach people full stack coding. So when they come home, they actually have viable skills that they can get jobs in a career where they can succeed and be able to support their families and themselves and their community and be successful parts of society. We found that one of the most important things next to housing, of course, is that formerly incarcerated can have jobs. If jobs are not available, what happens is people will go back to what they know. I know this firsthand. I was incarcerated for 3 years at Indiana Women's Prison. I'm a graduate of the Last Mile program. When I started, I remember thinking, I'm never going to be able to do this program. I am not good at math. So it is not math based, but I definitely learned more than just coding skills. I learned how to collaborate with other people. I learned digital skills, and I only spent about 3 years inside. So digital skills were, to me, Microsoft Office. When I came home, it was all G Suite, which is a little bit different if you know a little bit about that. Let's see, let me see this. So digital literacy and reentry, we actually have technology-based in-prison educational programs. We have a learning management system where people watch videos, they collaborate with one another, there's tutorials, there's little apps to teach you how to do it. We started the first ever in-prison Chromebook initiative in all of our facilities. We actually give Chromebooks to our students that they can take back to their housing units, and then they can continue to code while they're there. Something the last mile is very, we're really big on is that when they're inside the classrooms or on the Chromebook, it is a closed network. So it's almost like a cloned version of the internet. So people can't get on like Facebook or social media and things like that, but they can get on like Wikipedia and certain things that we've cloned that they can see. We have Grow with Google training. We've partnered with Bank of America for financial literacy training. And then we have a reentry and professional development. So here's our overview of our in-prison programs. We have an audio video production skills program that just launched about 1.5 years ago now, and then our web development skills, and then again, professional development. We find it's really important. There's always a missing link when people are inside facilities to where they are now, as to be able to like have that professionalism. Inside facilities, you don't get the chance to sit down and actually interview with people and mock interview and do technical assessments and things. So as soon as people come home, that is something that we provide. We have 600 plus returned citizens. Our employment rate is 86% right now. 90% of our alumni have gone through continued education, and currently we have a less than 1% recidivism rate for people who went through the last mile program. This is just a couple of our success stories. There's many, many more, Aron being one of them, and he'll talk here in just a minute. But we have people that have went through our program and incarcerated for a lot of time, and then they come home, they go on to continue their education, and now are working, like Keep is working at Cash App, and then Amalia also works at Checker, which is where Aron is. We have a ton of collaborative opportunities. We work with government officials and policymakers, tons of employment organizations that are interested in educational and fair chance hiring. We no longer say second chance because some people didn't have a first chance. So we believe in giving everyone a fair chance when they come home. We work with the Department of Corrections leadership, many technology professionals, and community members and mentors. We're actually getting ready to start a mentorship program. So that's people all over the world that are willing to meet with our alumni, even for just an hour a week, and just help them be professionally more, have that time to like work on their resume, whatever it might be that's going to help both the mentor and the alumni. We do have responsibilities of tech and reentry. We want to make sure that we teach people about respecting privacy, ensuring fair access, and balancing human and technology interaction. We've found that sometimes with the way tech is nowadays, people will come home and they get on every social media app and there's no balance to what real life is like. So that is an important thing that we want to teach. We also believe in teaching privacy first policies. We're all-inclusive programs and human-centric support systems. We create a very robust reentry department. We have virtual coffee twice a week. We have events that bring people around, all of our alumni, so that they actually have a community of people around them that support them. And then we also 100% believe in economic and societal implications of tech-empowered reentry. The reality of today is that tech is the center of how everything runs and works. So we want to reduce stigmas, industrialized workforce, economic benefit, and non-traditional perspectives. Aron, I'm going to pass to you.
All right. Thank you, Molly. And thank you, everybody, for coming. I'm going to just, my name's Aron Roy. I'm just going to share a little bit about my journey and how it relates to digital literacy. So, all right. So a little over 1 year ago, my life was vastly different. Today, I stand before you as a testament to the power of transformation and the profound impact of giving individuals a chance. Released from prison just over 1 year ago, after spending a decade inside, I've transitioned from incarceration to IT apprentice at a company called Checker. I was also a student at the Last Mile, which I'll talk more about. My background is steeped in the tenets of technology and education. My father immigrated to the United States to study computer science, and my mother devoted her life to teaching young minds in an elementary school. Growing up, digital literacy complemented traditional literacy. They jointly shaped my perspective on the world. Before my incarceration, technology and I were in lockstep. I worked in tech retail, and I was well-versed in the latest cell phones, computers, and all their complexities. However, once incarcerated, my relationship with technology radically changed. The prison environment operated as if frozen in time, with no room for digital progress. No cell phones, no Google Chrome, no status updates, no tweets. Debating facts became difficult because there was no Google to fact check anything. The Almanac is one of the most sought after books inside because of that. Music, once streaming through my phone from the cloud, was once again back on CDs. Several years into my term, a flicker of hope emerged, the opportunity to join the last mile. The joy of being on a computer again was shadowed by a daunting realization that the digital world hadn't stopped evolving while I was away. I had been gone for probably about 7 years before I was able to get back on a computer. So using a computer again wasn't as easy as riding a bike. The gears had changed and I had to relearn pretty much everything. After my release, even sending an email was a challenge. The reply button and its entire aesthetics, once familiar, had morphed into something alien. I felt overwhelmed trying to navigate my cell phone, from silencing it while also letting family calls ring, to grappling with telemarketers at unusual hours. Even simple tasks like checking a train schedule became a hurdle. I wasn't really able to multitask and use my phone and have a bunch of people walking around me and eat at the same time. So all this technology was definitely a shock to me. Yet every dark space has a window of light, and the reentry team at the last mile was that window for me. They were my compass. My digital literacy translators assisted me in regaining my stride and relearning these fundamental tools that had once been second nature to me before my incarceration. I was assigned an advocate, Kevin, also a last mile alumni, who helped me fill in the gaps in my tech skills. He helped me get comfortable with Slack and email, helped me convert my resume into a digital format, create a presence on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out if you want to look me up on LinkedIn. I'm definitely there. And Kevin was also there for me when I needed help, like navigating parole. I'll share with you one day I was going to speak to a group of tech recruiters and hopefully get myself a job. And I had traveled about an hour on the train. And I remember coming up off the platform into San Francisco and my parole agent calling me and telling me, come home right now, I need to see you. I was probably about 2 or 3 weeks out, and just the amount of people, the environment, everything. I remember stopping and being like, what should I do? I called Kevin and he said, you have to go back. You can't have a job if you're not free, right? So you have to go see your parole agent. And like, I knew that was the right thing to do, but there was this like almost crippling anxiety in this new environment with this new situation. And so having a reentry advocate wasn't just helpful for my tech skills, it was helpful for me in general. And so I share this personal journey with you today to underscore the permanence and pervasive nature of technology in our lives. It's an integral companion, and yet it's conspicuously absent in prisons. It's imperative to realize the need for digital literacy in these spaces to facilitate smoother transition for individuals reintegrating into society. And I'm really happy to see here that there's an effort to do this inside before people are released. I know it might seem logical to say, well, just wait. When they get out, they can go to the library and take free classes. But I believe someone was saying there's so much other stuff going on when you're reentering society that if we could shift the digital literacy training inside, it would definitely help out with public safety. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you for coming and listening to my story.
Thank you, Aron.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to talk about the last mile a little bit and the journey of being from a women's perspective of being incarcerated. So women, they have a tendency we don't rally around each other as much. So when you talk about digital literacy and learning that inside, it does not happen in a woman's prison. And so it's when you go into the last mile classroom and you're sitting in there, it is the one time that you actually feel like you are a real human being and you can, and like you're inside of this very dark place and you're trying to make a difference in your world. So if we believe 100% in rehabilitation, then what we need to do is make sure that everyone has every opportunity available to them. And so when I got into the Last Mile program, I remember sitting in there one day with some other classmates and I was like, this is so hard. Because who would have ever thought, you know, coding would be like that difficult? Because I didn't even know what coding was. But I'm going to date myself here a little bit because I used to have MySpace and you actually had to code a little bit on MySpace. So as crazy as that is, but it was very life changing. And so another thing that the TLM does is when people come home, we do give every single one of our alumni a brand new laptop computer to help them in this digital, you know, age and be able to, you know, apply for positions and get resumes together. So thank you so much for listening to our little speech.
That was very inspirational to hear, and I'm so happy. There's so many of these organizations in the U.S. that are doing this work, and I think you're one of the most prominent ones. And so I'm so happy that you were here with us today. And I think, Swayam, can we? I noticed there's a lot of questions in the chat window. So you've been monitoring. I have some of my own. We have some of our own questions, but we're going to put them to the end and answer the ones that you all have.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Molly and Aron. I saw a comment in the chat. Someone was asking who is cutting onions, and I was at some points during these presentations, I was asking myself the same thing. So thank you so much. I'll just I guess I'll just start off with the questions in order that they came up. So, and I'll try my best to reference the point in time that that question came up, so we can kind of maybe relate it back to the presentation that was going on at that time. So the first question that had come up was, it was referenced during Pia's presentation, and it was asked by Carolyn Govin. Carolyn had asked to hear more about securing the laptops that were used, and sort of, securing the laptops so that users could not modify the components that might be within those laptops. She was impressed by, or I was under the impression that tablet devices were maybe perhaps more superior than laptops. And then just a segue question to that was asked by Jenna. Does Doris have the ability to read forms, important documents out loud to folks? Thinking about help for those with general literacy challenges.
Yes. So first about the data security and data protection for laptop, we had an outside party to do security testing and auditing to the system. So they are people specialized in hacking systems. So they tried in every possible way to break the system and then give instructions how to harden it more. So we passed the test after their testing and collaborated also with the vendor a lot. So yes, it's possible to make a secure laptop to prison conditions too. And of course, then we have some security monitoring features in the Doris itself, so staff can monitor certain actions in the system also, and also the whitelisted internet as explained. So it's not a totally open internet, but we secure that there's no uncontrolled access to outside at any point. So, but it requires expertise to make the system secure. And then this reading out loud thing was actually a good idea. It could be a new feature in the Doris if we could include some AI into it. We've actually had this kind of device that looks, it's not a Doris device, but it looks a little bit like a USB stick. And then you read the material with the stick and it's read out loud to a headset that you're wearing. So these kind of devices already exist for people who have literacy problems or similar kind of disadvantages. Also for blind people, they already have this kind of devices to read the documents out loud.
Excellent. Thank you so much for speaking to those questions, Pia. So the next question was, I'm so sorry if I mispronounced your name, Kozekisel, starts with a K. They were interested in the percentage of offender population who do not have computer literacy skills. There was maybe a bit of an understanding that it may be offenders or incarcerated people who are over the age of 40. But we noted that James had also made a comment that it's even younger incarcerated people who may also have lower tech skills.
Was it a question to me?
I guess maybe broadly, yeah, sort of maybe what is like the percentage of what is the percentage of population who have challenges with computer literacy, and is that sort of found within certain demographics as well?
Yeah, actually, Finland is quite a high-tech society, so I think overall our digital literacy is quite high. But those that are marginalized already otherwise, socially, or due to criminal background, or due to other reasons, maybe mental health problems, elderly people, otherwise disadvantaged people, those that are already marginalized in other ways usually are also digitally marginalized, so they kind of go together. So I think it's definitely a minority, but it's a significant minority considering all the societal problems and individual suffering that it causes. So yeah, that's my answer. I don't know more detailed answer to this.
I will say that I think we assume that whatever younger population is, and I can't believe that 30 was the one line for elderly people, but whatever we're going to call the younger generation, I think we just assume that they use a phone, so they're techie, or they have computer skills. And no, that's not the same thing, right? Like, so I agree our younger population can probably text and do the things they have wanted to do or needed to do on their phone, but that doesn't mean they can apply to an online job. It doesn't mean they can actually create a resume. It doesn't mean they could register for a vaccine appointment on, right? Like, those are the things that we just, I think, historically have assumed in general that people are learning when we're not teaching it to them.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I was at a workshop in Sweden in the spring, and I was working with folks who were working with younger incarcerated people. And, you know, they were like, oh, we don't have that problem because, you know, the people we work with are 18 or 20. And, you know, that's exactly what I said, James. You know, what can they actually do? Do you know what they can do? And then they were like, oh, yeah, no, we've never thought about it that way. And so it is definitely an issue that is not, that is spanning all generations. It's not just an issue for older generations. It is an issue for younger generations as well.
I see somebody asked a question in the Q&A window related to this. What are the of interest to me as a gerontologist, what are the challenges with participants who have general literacy or cognitive challenges?
How much time do you have?
A few minutes.
But I will say that that's not entirely uncommon. And this is part of the purpose and the importance of the teacher in the room, right? Because sometimes that's learning it's learning the student, and it's figuring out how they learn, what supports they need. I think someone had mentioned either having currently or previously incarcerated people. One of the things that we're sort of trying to scale a little bit is having inmate tutors, right? Whether they're recent graduates of our own or just other members of our population, because sometimes that's how someone wants to learn. They feel intimidated asking the teacher, or, right? Like, so it's just about providing as many different paths as possible, right? Even for us, micro-credentials has been a way, it's sort of a carrot sometimes to engage people with education where they otherwise didn't want to. And so, but this idea of coming in and taking a very specific short course, I'll do that. And then they come in and then they realize, okay, maybe I can do this. And so My sort of generic answer from the education standpoint is being very flexible and having multiple pathways to success.
And I guess there's also, I guess there's also modifications that may need to be made to some of the devices so that it's easier for people to read things on the screen. It's easier to hold the device. So there's a lot of things we don't think about when you're older. Just even like holding a phone can be challenging for people. So those are some of the other things I was thinking about. There was also a question from Glenn Brown earlier. I don't know if people saw Pia's answer, but I'm going to read the question because I thought it was important. In the outside world, people disappear into their technology. Teenagers hide in their rooms with their phones, etc. What has been the impact of DORIS on inmate cell time, interaction, isolation? Does it influence staff to impose more lockdown time, feeling that it would be less onerous because of the resources inmates now have in their cells? And Pia typed an answer. Pia, I don't know if you want to repeat your answer if other people didn't see it.
Yeah. So these were probably some kind of a risk that could have happened, and this was probably what some people might have been thinking about when we were implementing the project. But as I explained in my presentation, this has not been the experience in Finland. So it's important to see that DORIS is a tool. It's a tool to support service use, and prisons, of course, provide a lot of face-to-face services besides digital services. And as I explained, there's also more time for staff for the face-to-face work, since the so-called routine tasks don't take their time so much anymore, thanks to prisoners doing part of the tasks by themselves. So I think, as I said, that the overall so-called communicational level and intensity has increased between staff and inmates. And also the fact that staff needs to instruct prisoners to use the devices increases this kind of communication and help from staff to prisoners and prisoners between themselves, giving help to each other. So before there was face-to-face communication, now there's face-to-face communication plus extra communication via the DORIS. So I think, and also more communication to outside, because the outside service providers cannot always come to inside prison due to distances, costs, etc. So of course there are a lot of partners that can come to prison, but those that can't, they all now have a way to communicate and provide their services to prisoners.
I didn't. I was just looking at a paper this morning published last year. It was about younger people in prisons and found that those who were engaging in the digital education programs felt a greater sense of connection and engagement with their teachers, which I thought was very positive, because it's very hard to engage young people, period. So if you can find other ways to do it, I think that's particularly beneficial. Swayam, do we have other?
Yeah, there are a few other questions here.
And if any of them are for Pia, perhaps we could do those because I know she needs to leave a bit early.
Yeah, for sure. I think most of the other questions are sort of general or were asked during other points of the presentation. So maybe I'll just go to question by CLSC staff. Are there any stats on how many people are actively accessing this in each CSC institution? I'm assuming it's accessing the program in our Canadian Federal Corrections where this has been implemented. CLSC staff was curious to know about how many people actually have consistent access versus it being just available in the institution, and how many devices are in each institution.
So the what's it like in the institution is going to vary because every institution is very, very different as far as population and geography and everything. But I did look up because I saw that question. So in the last 12 months, we've had 2,225 offenders on the system. Now, that could be for one course. Some have taken, 75 micro-credentials. Some have completed a high school diploma. Some just showed up for one thing, and that's fine, right? As far as site by site, I don't have that data quickly or nicely. As far as the access within the institution, currently it's in the school, right? So it's only in the school. That's a piece we're sort of navigating because, you know, in a perfect world, they could access these things elsewhere, but this was sort of something we'd never done before. So that's how it became approved. And so at Bath, I have 65, maybe 70 computers. Our smallest site probably has 10, but they also have a very small population. And so we kind of have everything in between that.
Interesting. Thank you. And I just see maybe another question sort of linked to your comments there. Will CSC implement their system in the community corrections as well for those incarcerated people who have special conditions imposed to prevent them access to internet or regular digital means?
So there's actually someone attending this that could probably answer that better than me. We're aware, especially when so there's sort of two parts to your question. One is they're in the community. Are we still going to own them a bit? And that is a very complicated one that we're exploring. The other is the internet access. Now, again, when there's conditions on parole, there's all sort of stuff, but our internet access, depending on like, trying to think of how to frame this, because we know there's court orders that say you can't touch the internet, but this isn't normally what they mean, right? They mean access to other things on the internet. And so to be honest, it's a very good question because these are the questions we're navigating. These are the questions that internally as well as externally we're trying to work through. So I don't have a really satisfactory answer for you because I have my opinion on it, but I promise you I'm not supposed to say it in front of all of you, right? We're supposed to sort it out internally and figure out kind of the right, safest way to do this. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, James. I imagine there might be a lot of sort of ethical considerations that might come up when we're navigating these challenges. I know Eddy and we had some questions that touched on some of the ethical issues that are involved with digital literacy. And just being mindful of the time, what I can do is send the questions that came up in the chat to our speakers, if that is okay, for an answer, and then I can send those out to our participants. But Eddy, is it okay if I asked one of those questions
please.
We had? Yeah, okay. So
if our speakers are willing to stay for a few more minutes, if they have to go, they can go.
Yes. I'll try to keep it quick. So yeah, we realized that getting buy-in to support these sort of initiatives focusing on digital literacy for incarcerated people and returning citizens requires a significant amount of collaboration at multiple levels, from governments, corporations, community organizations, schools, funding agencies, etc. And so this results in many stakeholders with an interest in facilitating a rehabilitative process. And so we're just wondering if there's time, if you could touch on some of the ethical principles that guide preparing citizens for re-entry, for protecting their human rights and cultivating a restorative experience. And in addition, how do these principles drive corporate responsibility at all stakeholder levels?
So when Eddy was talking earlier about we'll discuss ethics, my question was, how much time do you have? Because this is the game we're always walking, which is our mandate is public safety, but also this is the right thing to do, right? That's why I was mentioning to BV and Pia that like they backed with data. The thing I just sort of feel to be true. So I'm glad that they have like the data to support it because that's a better argument than this feels to be the right thing to do. And so we can recognize that these skills have to be part of our work with offenders because they're so integral to our world now. But the ethical piece is our primary mandate is public safety. And so how do we do this safely? And so that's the game that I'm just going to even throw back is that's the constant balance that we're working on. Because we've safely put them on a website. Can there be more websites? Sure. Which ones? what's safe, what's not, right? Like, and these become like very large conversations, right? So we're just trying to prove a concept that you can do a website, right? But then where do we go from there? But I also agree with what Joanne just said in the chat.
I have a question for
Yeah,
Molly.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's a really complex question, right? It's not a 1-minute answer, but it really boils down to a couple of the things that Molly already mentioned. 95% here in the US are going to come back out. So as a society, we have a choice to make, right? We can just let people sink or swim, right? And then wonder why we have a revolving door effect and be like, oh, I don't know why it's happening. Or we can provide the tools and the support to actually allow people that fair chance, right? That they might have never had. And so, like James said, technology, digital skills, that's part of it. We live in this digital world. It's not a luxury. It's not just a little add-on. It's something you have to be able to do to function. And you definitely have to be able to do it to have just even a chance to thrive in our society. So I think when we speak about ethics, we have to think of that side too, right? It's not just public safety, but it's also what do we want to do with our society? What do we want to provide for people to actually have a fair chance to make it?
I wanted to extend on that by briefly mentioning a paper that Victoria and one of her colleagues, Lee Hadlington, wrote in the journal of the Prison Journal. And it was about a study done in 2017 in the UK about public attitudes. And they found that there were sort of ambivalent attitudes. People were in favor of rehabilitation, but they had mixed or quite negative attitudes about access to technology. And I just wanted to point out a few things I noticed here. Quite a few people felt that providing digital access might help people continue the criminal activities, not being aware of the safeguards that are already in place. And I think this provides an opportunity for the correctional services and CAC members and researchers to educate the public about the safeguards that are in place and to remind them that this is all good if it's done safely. 50% of respondents felt that skills, that these programs can improve skills, make better use of time in prison, enhance learning opportunities, and find a job. But the public was less convinced that digital technology can improve self-confidence. And there was even a smaller proportion, 22%, who perceived a direct relationship between digital access use and a reduction in reoffending. There were quite a few who believe that this is a luxury and that people in prison should have to pay for it and they should have to earn the privilege to use computers, not recognizing that this is really a basic thing that everybody needs access to. It's not luxury. When I don't consider my own computer a luxury, it's a necessity. And there were people who also disagreed that digital literacy would assist with employability, like 40%. And just thinking about, that there's so much opportunity here. And half believe that this should not even be a priority in our prisons, that we should be spending money on something else, and that more money should be spent on security and punishment. So there's this hodgepodge of contradictory views here. And I think this can hinder the role of correctional staff. Like if they want to implement this, they're being told, well, the public doesn't want this, or there'll be an outrage about this. And so there's this, there's work to be done in this area. I also had a question for Molly. Do employers consider the kinds of digital training programs in prison to be of the same quality and on par to the kinds of programs that people would learn in a more traditional setting out in the community? And if not, how can we change their attitudes about that?
Absolutely. So that is something that we deal with on a pretty regular basis. Is there's a gap between being inside of a facility and then coming home and being able to navigate the work world. So what we do, the professional world. So what we do is we make sure with our reentry department that we're teaching those skills when people come home. I don't find that they don't recognize the skills that they've learned inside, but there's this inherent, like, they think that everyone just knows those skills. So a lot of times when people come home, especially out of our alumni from our program, they'll say, oh, I'm a software engineer. So they just think, oh, that means that they know how to use all digital skills. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. So something that we work towards is making sure that we teach our alumni every kind of professional digital skill that they need. But if it is an issue, one thing that we have worked with our reentry department will work really close with the employer and, you know, find out what it is that they're looking for, and then we can go back and make a whole learning path for that alumni to learn.
We navigate that stigma a little bit as well. So we don't issue, say, a high school diploma from Bath Institution. We do it via private school so that it's not issued by a prison. Or when we're talking about certifications, we're using third parties. So I think we're just working under the assumption there'll be a stigma, not like, but so we just sort of, on the resume, it's not going to say, I got my high school diploma in a prison. It just says I was given it to me, and they can name a private school. And
but of course, if on the resume they say that they got the certificate around the same, like, people can put 2 and 2 together, and some could infer that the degree was obtained while in prison, and then that would have a stigma attached to it.
One thing I want to stress too is something that we really work towards is skills first. So look at the skills that the individual has, not their past or where they learned those skills at, but what skills they possess that they can bring to that position and be able to actually move forward.
Another question I had that I don't know if this has been discussed at all is social media. People will inevitably use social media once they leave prison, for better or for worse. And I'm wondering if there are any programs that help teach people how to use that in a way that's actually healthy for people.
I mean, there are programs across libraries who do that now. It's relatively new. I have not heard of a program connected to rehabilitation, reentry, or corrections that is doing anything like that. But it is a big issue. I know that from my own work with returning citizens, and also from other research that has shown that, you know, some people steer clear of it altogether because they're scared of it, and they're scared of the potential negative implications. And some people dive in head first, and then it all goes haywire, or, you know, or it actually goes really well. I've had a few participants who loved it and were able to reconnect with family, and they've been using it pretty sparingly, but it works really well for them. So it's a hodgepodge, but I have not, unfortunately, heard of specific programs related to incarceration.
I have something a little bit of, so I'm working with an organization called Puolakka. It's PIN. There's a Q in there. I'd have to look it up, but it's a Inuit nonprofit in Nunavut, and they're going to be running a micro-credential through us called Connected Elders. And so it's about respectfully teaching your elders how to use technology. And one of the lessons is on like how to make a Facebook account. And to the like gaps that we forget or assume knowledge, it's 24 steps. Thank you, Linda. That was fast. It's 24 steps to set up a Facebook account. And I was like, no, it's not. But then you look and you go, oh, those are all the assumed things that we don't even think about. Like, no, you have to have an email address before you can do that. So but it's more about just how to get established, and then kind of basic navigation. But again, that was something that we kind of went, okay, yeah, that's a skill, so to speak, right? Like there's now, that's where you're going to find local information even, right? Or local groups. And so anyways.
Well, the part and parcel of that is also knowing how to stay safe online and how to avoid becoming a victim of a scam. And a lot of that happens through social media. Even to the best of us, I know a police officer who fell victim to a scam because they're getting very sophisticated, and now they're using artificial intelligence. And so relatedly, I'm asking, are there any programs to help people learn how to stay safe on the internet in general? Because that's a big thing. And even just basic things like, you know, picking the correct password and keeping your passwords stored securely and not sharing them, not using the same password. Those things that I think even most people don't think enough about, but probably an even bigger issue for people who are afraid of what the public might think if they find out about their online presence or whatever. So I don't know, Bianca knows if there's anything like that available.
Only again in libraries, but again, I've not heard of that specifically related to the corrections context, unfortunately. It's a very big issue.
Swayam, were there any other questions in the
We do have a few other questions coming up, but I do realize it's also 10 minutes past our end time. So I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, and I maybe might be best to just email the questions to the speakers so they can respond to it when they have a little bit more flexibility. So I guess with that being said, Eddy, is it okay that we conclude today's webinar? Yeah, great. Well, I just wanted to express my sincere gratitude for the speakers taking out your time in your busy days from all different parts of the world to join us and inform our participants about the great work that you're doing. And I don't know, Eddy or Dennis, did you want to share a few words as well?
Yeah, no, I'll just echo that, and again express my appreciation, particularly to our guest speakers. We're so grateful you were able to share some insights from different parts of the world. Certainly, it's eye-opening for me, and hopefully for a number of us, I imagine, in the Correctional Service of Canada up here, in terms of what's being done elsewhere around the world, and it's given us a lot of thought, or a lot to think about. Obviously, the whole issue of digital literacy is going to be a major priority and focus in the coming months and years everywhere, including up here. So interesting times for sure, and particularly as it was referenced, trying to balance kind of our dual mandate of public safety while still assisting all our clients when they return to the community. So thanks again to all our guest speakers. It's a very timely topic. I almost feel like we need to do a part 2 down the line, maybe in another year or two, and things evolve and change so quickly. So this will continue to be an area of focus for sure. But thank you again.
And I wanted just to add, as a CAC member, I think there's quite a bit of work here for us to do to familiarize ourselves with this topic and again, to educate the public and try to change attitudes about this, because attitudes play a big role. Public opinion is important and can hinder or support this kind of programming. So on that note, thank you everyone for joining us. We hope to be able to save the contents of the chat window and we will email that out, and we'll also email the questions, a link to the YouTube recording, the slides, and any other resources that we find. If anybody wants us to include any resources they have other than the speakers, we can put those in the document, contact information, whatever, we can share that with everyone, and we'll post that online, email it to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Dennis. Thank you so much, Eddy. And thank you all again. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and take care.